means that the number one pick in the 2021 NBA draft goes to the Detroit Pistons.
Who's got the number one pick in this year's draft? Who's got the number one pick in this year's draft?
Basketball!
Select Isaiah Stewart.
The Detroit Pistons select Killian Hayes.
Sadiq, that was absolutely sensational.
I don't know what went into that process. I met the criteria to be selected, but I wasn't.
From long range. Oh! Yes!
Detroit basketball! What is going on, Pistons fans? Welcome back to another edition of the Palace of Pistons Podcast, brought to you by Believe. Aaron Johnson and Jasper Apollonia here with you. Jasper, we're fresh off of Media Day. A lot of quotes, a lot of discussion from Troy Weaver on down from the Detroit Pistons organization. How are we feeling after we've hit the what I consider the official starting point of the NBA's next NBA season, the new NBA season, which is Media Day? How are we doing after that?
Well, Media Day was fine, Aaron, but I think that you and our co-host, Mike Angulano, who's unfortunately not here today, I think you guys might think that I don't listen to this podcast when I'm not on it, because I heard all the smack you two were talking to me last week about beating me in fantasy, and I just want to say you're lucky I'm on here today, all right? After that vicious and brutal assault, not just on my fantasy team, and I don't just mean the score lines that you guys whooped me with, also on my character, you called me a coward. You said I skipped out on the podcast because of the ass kicking I got. And while that might be true, I resent you for saying it. So I just want to make that very clear right off the bat.
Look, Mike and I, we were talking a big game last week. Mike and I are the two final remaining undefeated teams in the Palace of Pistons Fantasy Football League, both 3-0, both feeling pretty good about ourselves. Mike just made a hell of a trade that I'm not sure how it got through, but it did.
We can't get into it now, because if we do, that's the whole podcast. I'm going to be going off about him trading Mike Williams and Clyde Edwards-Helaire for friggin' Joe Mixon. Unbelievable.
It was
regardless.
Yes, regardless. We did talk a lot last week, but look, I got you here this week. Mike is AWOL. So you and I are now holding it down. If we need to talk a little smack about Mike, I'm not going to say we can't do that throughout the show. But before we get into talking smack about Mike, we'll also probably touch on the Pistons a little bit here. I do want to talk about our sponsor who helps make this show possible every week, BetOnline. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports, contests, and events with first-to-market odds and lines. Find reviews and news for every league, including Major League Baseball, the NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, golf, and esports. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all of your sports information, from live in-game betting, props, and futures. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to join today and make your first sports bet. Use our promo code BLEAV50, BLEAV50, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online, where the game starts.
Aaron, Pistons season over under on that win total. It's now at 29.5, by the way.
Is that a 4 or 5 game swing?
Well, it was at 26 and a half, right?
Okay.
So that's a three game swing. It seems about right. I said to me, I wasn't here last week. I unfortunately was not able to talk about the Bojan Bogdanovic trade, which I loved, by the way, just to put that out there. But I said I think it's like a 3 to 6 game swing on their total over under. I think that was a huge trade, like an absolutely huge trade. And I think that we should probably start off by talking about Bojan Bogdanovic and the quotes he had for Media Day, especially about Cade Cunningham. He didn't have a whole lot to say, but when he did talk to them, he only had great things to say about Cade, obviously. He said, Cade is the franchise player. He's a great guy, a great player. Putting me next to him, he's going to have more space to operate. I've only just been here a couple of days, so we'll learn about each other. Not a super revealing quote, Aaron, but I think it kind of goes to show exactly what we've all been saying. That's what he's here for. He's here to give Cade Cunningham more space to operate in that half-court offense, right?
Absolutely. And I know there's been some talk about, oh, Boyan can be the sixth man and Boyan might be coming off the bench. Like, that's not the case. This is a guy that, average 19 points a game, is a proficient three-point shooter. He is going to be starting. He has years of experience playing on high-level teams that comes with plenty of playoff games and repetitions. This is a guy that is going to be starting alongside Cade Cunningham, as he said. It is very much in the realm of possibility that Bojan Bogdanovic could be the Pistons' second best player this year. I don't think that's a guarantee, but I think it could be the case. Nonetheless, he's definitely one of their top players. I think, if you had to ask me right now, I'd say it's Cade Cunningham, obviously, one. And then I think it's kind of in a 2A, 2B situation between Bogdanovic and Saddiq Bey. But he's a very important player nonetheless. No matter how you rank him, he is going to be starting. His job is to space the floor for Cade Cunningham. Defenses are going to get sucked in on Cunningham when he is handling the basketball, when he is trying to break defenses down. And getting Bogdanovic on the court, spacing the floor is going to be massive to make defenses pay for doing that to Cunningham. I think the synergy between those two guys looks like it should be very strong, just based off how the two play, their archetypes, their strengths. I am very excited about the potential that Bogdanovic adds to this team. I said it last week, very much liked the trade. The Pistons gave up Kelly Olynyk and Saban Lee, who it sounds like Lee is being cut by Utah from what's being reported. I'm not exactly sure who had it, but I think they said it's unlikely Saban Lee is going to remain with the Jazz. So the Pistons really didn't give up anything to get Bogdanovic, even if he is only here up until the trade deadline, even if he does get moved again. I think it will help Detroit to have a player like Bogdanovic on the court. And I don't necessarily want to go too much more into that because we talked about it last week, but the quote is encouraging because he understands what his role is going to be, and he is the type of pro that should be able to maximize that role.
Yeah, and Aaron, I know you guys talked about it last week, but I think a lot of people expect Bogdanovic to kind of be the 3/4 along with Saddiq Bey. I think those are two guys that are going to play kind of a similar role this year in terms of kind of being like bigger wing defenders who can sort of slide between 2 and 4. Certainly, you do hope that Saddiq learns something from Bogdanovic, especially in terms of like the way that he plays. Bogdanovic is not some great rim finisher. He's not some guy with an amazing handle, but he knows how to get himself free and not just stand there and do catch and shoot stuff, which I think is something that Saddiq Bey could absolutely learn from. But as we're talking about Bogdanovic as potentially the starting 4, he's not the only guy who's being potentially looked at for that spot. Dwane Casey had an interesting quote on Isaiah Stewart, I thought. Here's what he said. He said, "What's going to have to manifest itself, it's not natural right now, is for Isaiah to slide to the 4, to open some spots for everybody, because right now there's 4, and it's tough to play that many in today's game to be that big. I really feel like Isaiah and also Marvin can slide out to the 4 and space the floor. That's our charge right now, is trying to get them to do that." So, Aaron, looking at that quote, especially when we're talking about Bogdanovic as your starting 4, what do you read into there? Are you seeing this as a long-term project to move Marvin Bagley and Isaiah Stewart to the 4? Or is this something that you potentially see coming down the pipe this year, either after a potential Bogdanovic trade or even potentially before?
I think this is one of the most important quotes from Media Day. I think both Dwane Casey and Isaiah Stewart talking about him playing the 4. This is something that we heard about going into the offseason. We saw it in Summer League. This is something that's going to continue to be a development in Detroit. It's something that they're obviously taking very seriously, and they're putting time, effort, and resources into this. I do think that the Bogdanovic trade signals to me that it's something that they are going to take slowly, which I think is smart because you kind of have your starting forwards figured out in Bay and in Bogdanovic, unless they go very, very small, or excuse me, very, very big, and start Bay and Bogdanovic at like the 2 and 3 per se, with Cade at the 1, and then go big with Stewart at the 4 and someone like Noel, Duren, Bagley, a duo out of those 4 guys up front together. But I think it's something that we're just going to see in spurts to start the season, to be honest with you. I don't think it's going to be something that dominates the starting lineup to begin the season. I think it's something that as time goes on, as injuries occur, a potential Bogdanovic trade again, it's something that the Pistons are going to spend some time working on in smaller spurts at the beginning of the year to see what it looks like, to learn how to maximize it. And then when the time does come that Jalen Duren is ready to take on more minutes, potentially be the starting 5 that I think Troy Weaver envisions him being for this franchise of the future, that's when it's going to be go time for Isaiah Stewart to either perform as the 4 and be that Al Horford type guy that now not only he but Troy Weaver has compared him to. And if he can be that, that sets him up for a very successful career. It cements him in Detroit's rotation. But if it doesn't work out for him at the 4, then it certainly puts pressure on him, and it might put him in a scenario where he's either backing up Duren or he's on his way out. Like, I think this team is very, very dedicated to Duren. They spent resources to get him. He is a guy that they were tied to heavily. It was said that Troy Weaver was considering drafting him at number 5.
Mm-hmm.
I think sooner rather than later, Duren is going to be in the rotation. I think it's very important Stewart is able to grow and develop. I like that Detroit's not going to push it on him all at once. I think the Bogdanovic trade signals that. There's pressure on him still nonetheless, though, to try to adapt as quickly as possible because they do have Bagley, who they just signed for $37 million. They spent the resources on Duren, and they have Nerlens Noel. So they have that group of bigs that they got to play still, and Isaiah Stewart certainly belongs in the mix as well. But in terms of maximizing his future, I think it comes with being able to play not just the 5, but the 4 spot as well.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Aaron, especially what you just said about Jalen Duren. He's obviously a crucial part of this core moving forward, and not just because we heard those rumors about Troy Weaver being enamored with him and potentially even taking him at number 4. It's one of those things as well where, look, they basically traded Jeremy Grant for Jalen Duren. But not just Jalen Duren, they also took on money in order to get Jalen Duren. So I think, to me, they wouldn't have done that if that wasn't a player they felt really, really strongly about. And he's obviously going to have a big role in this team moving forward. I do think that that's one of the interesting things about this Bogdanovic trade is especially when it comes to Isaiah Stewart and his development potentially at the 4, because now with Bogdanovic in the fold, what you could potentially do is slide guys down. We're kind of anticipating a starting lineup of Cade, Ivey, Sadiq, Bogdanovic, and then probably Isaiah Stewart at the 5. But if you want to really develop Isaiah Stewart and give him good reps, meaningful reps at the 4, you can do that now with Bogdanovic in the fold. You can play Cade Cunningham at the 1, slide Sadiq Bey and Bogdanovic down to the 2 and 3, and then throw Isaiah Stewart out there at the 4. See how his shooting comes along, because that's always been kind of the issue with Isaiah Stewart at the 4 is, well, if his shot isn't there immediately, you're going to have a lot of trouble spacing the floor. And now with Bogdanovic in the fold, that's not necessarily true. You can still have 3 great shooters on the floor, give Isaiah Stewart a little bit of space and opportunity to shoot himself, and maintain a solid defensive presence, because now you have Jalen Duren and you have Nerlens Noel also at the 5. So I think for me, that's another aspect of the Bogdanovic trade that hasn't really been talked about, but I think it's super important. Isaiah Stewart going to the 4 works a lot better now with this lineup. So, yeah, I'm 100% with you. I think this was actually one of the most important quotes of Media Day. There's one other quote that I think was probably equally, if not more important, but we'll get to that. But yeah, I'm 100% in agreement with you. This is a crucial part of not just Isaiah Stewart's development, but pretty much the team as a whole development. Because if your long-term plan is to play Duren and Stewart together, Isaiah Stewart's the one who's going to have to move to the 4.
Agreed. It's like I go back to that 2021 draft, the 2020 draft, and I look at it as Troy Weaver was taking shots on guys that he liked. But these last 2 drafts were taking guys that he's confident in their ability to be part of the franchise long term. I think the trades he made back in the 2020 draft were part of, look, we have no young players right now. If I don't go get us some young pieces, we're essentially going to waste a year. Mm-hmm. And I can't afford to do that. I have some assets. Let me see what I can do. And he came away with Bey and Stewart, who both have futures in this league. How big is still to be determined in terms of how they continue to develop, how they adapt, how they change. But Stewart is a guy that can be a part of a team's core. It's going to be harder for him to do it now that Duren is in the fold. He's going to have to adapt, whereas someone like Saddiq Bey, who's a natural wing and can play really 2 to 4 because the wings are so interchangeable in today's game, it's easier for him to have other guys taking minutes, taking time from his role because he can play those different spots as well. Whereas Stewart, who's more of a natural 5, is going to have to spend the time developing as a 4 to prove that he's part of this core. So it's an interesting situation. This season is a good opportunity to determine where Stewart stands. And I'm excited to see how it goes because the talk about turning Isaiah Stewart into this Al Horford type of versatile big who's a menace defensively, a spacer offensively who helps move the ball, like that's all very, very interesting to me. And if it works, that's a massive play for the Pistons.
Oh, that's hugely important. And I'm glad you brought up Troy Weaver. And, that was one of those things. I'll fully admit to it. On draft night of 2020, I was not thrilled with the way that he went about acquiring Saddiq Bey and Isaiah Stewart necessarily. I thought he overpaid. It's like Luke Kennard and multiple seconds for the 19th pick. That's an overpay. But, and I'm going to give Troy Weaver a lot of credit for this. I think it was, I can't remember who said it to me on Twitter, but really when it comes down to it, look, being a successful franchise, a successful GM, it's not about winning each individual trade. Stan Van Gundy won a lot of individual trades, but he didn't build a good team. And while it might have looked like Troy Weaver kind of overpaid for those guys at the time, you're 100% correct in saying what he needed to do was acquire young talent with potential, and he needed to acquire it fast. And so by overpaying, quote unquote, a little bit, that's what he did. He didn't waste a year and say, well, maybe we have something in Luke Kennard. Oh, well, maybe we hold on to him to the deadline, see if we can get some picks for next year. He said, no, screw that. I'm going out and I'm building a team right now, day one. And he had a little bit of a quote on that as well. James Edwards of The Athletic asked Troy Weaver what he likes about his roster coming into the season. And Troy said, I finally feel like we have a full roster of complementary players. The first 2 years, we didn't. And that's my job, to make sure that we have a roster that can compete every night. And he didn't, I couldn't find the exact quote, but he also said a little something about, basically he came in day one and his job, what he had to do was tear it down to nothing, get that salary off, and then start building back up. And his exact quote was, "We're basically at zero right now." He basically was like, you know what? We've gotten to the baseline. This is when we start really building towards competing. So my question for you is, do you agree with that? Do you feel like this is finally a roster where you're like, this makes sense? This is something we can build on. I know the direction we're going in. The tear down is over. It's time to get better now.
Absolutely. I mean, you can't keep doing this top 5 pick every year type of build. Not with Cade Cunningham going into year 2, not with Saddiq Bey and Isaiah Stewart going into year 3. You add Bojan Bogdanovic. You added 2 more lottery picks. You added a couple proven veterans in Alec Burks and Nerlens Noel. Like, this is a team that, even if they aren't good enough to be a playoff team, this is a team good enough to compete every night. This is a team good enough to fight in every game they play. That doesn't mean they're on the same level as the top dogs of the Eastern and Western Conference, but they can't be going out and getting dropped by Charlotte, New York, Atlanta, Washington. Like, they have to be competing with those teams. They have to be winning some of those games. This is a roster that I'm not going to say is built to win, but it's not built to lose either. There's too many good players, and there's too high of a ceiling for some of these guys on the roster, specifically Cade Cunningham. I have grown more and more into the belief over the last few years that if you have a top 10 type guy, which I think Cade Cunningham can be, that's a guy that you can win with. Maybe not win a championship with, but you can be a good team with. And maybe you still have to get that number 2 guy next to him or build out the roster more complete. But you need to be competitive if you have that high level of player. And I'm not saying Cade Cunningham's going to end up being a top 10 player by the end of his second season in the league, but he can be very, very good. We've talked about him potentially being an all-star this upcoming season. Like, I think that's very, very much in the play. His potential is through the roof. He has better pieces around him to help alleviate some of the stress that came with his role last season. The Pistons need to be competitive overall. That doesn't mean that they have to win 50 games, but if they go out and pick up 20 wins on the year, that's concerning to me because there is too much talent on this roster to just flat out be bad. This should be a competitive team, even if they fall short of making the playoffs or making the play-in.
Oh, yeah. I mean, hey, I'll say this right now. They win 20 games this year. Dwane Casey should not have a job with this organization next season. Straight up. Like, that's unacceptable. I'm not saying you got to win 40 games or even 35, but 20, that would be a fireable offense. Unless, of course, like, obviously, like, Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey and Bogdanovic all go down. In that case, of course, you get it. That's just a disaster season. You tip your cap and you start over. But yeah, definitely. This is a team that exactly like Troy Weaver said, it's his job to make sure that they have a roster that can compete every night. And I think as of right now, they have that. You also mentioned, along with Cade Cunningham, in today's NBA, you do need that second star. And really, let's be honest, if you want to be a championship contender, you need that third star as well. It's not enough just to have a big 2. You need a big 3. We'll see if that changes over the next couple of years. With the, league expansion seems inevitable, to be honest. So we'll see if that changes with 2 new teams coming in into the league. Obviously, rosters are going to get pared down a little bit, and some teams are going to lose their stars. So I do think that might shift a bit. But hey, if we're talking about a second star for Cade Cunningham, I think we know who it is. It's got to be Jaden Ivey, right? And I thought Jaden had some really good quotes at Media Day, more than Cade, that's for sure. Jaden Ivey said, I mean, this is something that I think absolutely you have to love. First off, he said his goal is trying to get to the playoffs this year. That's his main goal. He doesn't really have anything else on his mind but winning. And obviously that's kind of a stock answer from a lot of NBA players. I mean, I think I remember Derrick Rose saying the same thing a couple of years ago, and they did not make the playoffs. But what he also said was, I want to be a Piston for life. It runs deep. And for me, I see a quote like that, and sometimes you hear it from guys and you don't believe it. With Jaden Ivey, I believe it. This is a guy that was so emotional at draft night, who so clearly wanted to get drafted to Detroit, who obviously we all know his connections to the city with his mom and his grandpa, DCD. This is a dude that, like he said, his love for Detroit really runs deep. So hearing those two quotes, what are you here? Well, wait, even if you don't believe that it runs deep, here's what he said. His favorite flavor of Faygo is orange, which I also need to get your feelings on that, because I think that's a terrible choice. The real answer, of course, has to be rock and rye. But yeah, seeing those quotes from Jaden Ivey, how do you feel about that? Is that something you're really buying into? Or do you think this is kind of just a little bit of like player speak?
Well, first off, to address a more important question, the Faygo answer, I don't really drink pop anymore, but when I did have a Faygo, 100%, 10 out of 10, every single time, it was orange. No, it was orange.
What?
100% spot on with that.
Oh,
that is a guy that obviously knows what's up, and it only cements my belief in him that I had when I was scouting him. Now, if I would have known he was a Faygo orange guy prior, he would have been 1-1 on my board. Sorry. But it just only makes me feel more confident in my assessment of him. So he's 100% spot on with that. I don't know why people are up in arms about that. Faygo orange is clearly the top flavor.
It's at best the third. It's like at best third. Like the blue, the blue soda one. That one's also. I'm sorry. See, you can tell I'm an East Coast liberal elite now because I say soda instead of pop.
What is
but
that?
No, orange is number 3. I think you're crazy. But we do definitely need to make sure Jaden Ivey goes down to one of those ICP wrestling shows in Detroit sometime. Got to get him in the ring. Got to get him hit over the head with a bottle of orange Faygo. I mean, it's just got to happen. I once ran into Shaggy 2 Dope at a Books A Million on 14 Mile with his family. And I think he'd do it. He seems like a nice guy. So that's just my opinions on the Faygo thing. Obviously, that's going to be a very controversial topic that we're going to discuss lots of times during the season. But no, really, to get more back to to his more quote unquote serious quotes, are you buying into that thing that he really wants to be a Piston for life? Do you think this is something that he's really serious about, or is he just saying it because, he's new and he's excited?
He certainly knows how to endear himself to a fan base, right? He certainly knows the right words to say. That definitely reminds me of Cade Cunningham in that sense. These are two guys that came in day one and immediately knew how to speak to the media, immediately knew what to say that was going to get fans going, was going to get fans excited, make them bigger fans of these individual players. Part of me does feel like it's coach speak, it's player speak, it's media training. But on the flip side, in today's landscape, you can't say I want to be a Piston for life without knowing that there's the fallback of you leaving the Pistons and knowing that quote's going to end up coming back at you hard. So I think he does partially believe that. It's also got to be probably due to the ties that he has to the city with his family and whatnot. And that's good to see. It's good to know. The winning is certainly more important to me in the immediate. I think this team needs to have that mindset of look, we really can't just be a 25-win team anymore. We have to start winning some more ball games. We are too good for this. We're going to start jeopardizing our futures, our coach's future, our front office's future, if we don't start winning more ball games. So it's encouraging. And I think we heard that sentiment from multiple players throughout media day was they really do feel like this team is ready to start winning. And I want to see that. I certainly need to see it in order to believe it, but I want to see that. I don't want a season of, we weren't really built to win this year. This is a season of development for us. I want to see these guys going out there every night, fighting to win, being coached to win, having the rotations run to win. And the way that these guys are talking, it encourages me that that will hopefully be the case.
Yeah. I mean, and a big part of that is buy-in, right? And I think you're seeing pretty much on all levels of the organization buy into what this team is doing. I thought here's a good example is Marvin Bagley at Media Day, just talking about how much he enjoys the team and his teammates, and he just loves being around these guys. And, I'm not saying that he, is a bad locker room presence or anything like that, but I definitely think it was one of those things, just seeing that somebody who's had a little bit of those quote unquote attitude problems in the past, just seeing how much he's already bought in there. I think that speaks really highly to the job Dwane Casey and Troy Weaver have done here. Aaron, I want to wrap things up. I have a couple extra quotes, just quick reactions I want to throw at you. Nerlens Noel said he wants to emulate Ben Wallace and catapult himself back into Defensive Player of the Year contention. You buying that or you selling that?
I really wanted to make sure we got this quote in there.
I got you. I know.
I can't believe he actually said that.
That was wild.
Because I really don't remember Nerlens Noel ever really being a DPOY candidate. I mean, obviously he has a reputation as a good defender, and I think that's huge for Detroit because I think that's why he's immediately going to make an impact on this team. Last year, they didn't have any sort of rim protection coming off the bench between Kelly Olynyk or Marvin Bagley or Luka Garza. Like, this is a big change for the Pistons to where this is the team that has more rim protection than they've ever had in Troy Weaver's time. And that probably coincides with the whole thing of they have more talent than they've ever had in Troy Weaver's time as the general manager here. But this is a guy that, whether you like it or not, is going to be in the rotation at the beginning of the season. He is a veteran. He is liked around the league. He is liked by Troy Weaver. They have a prior relationship. And he's an effective defender. For a second unit that is going to have some scoring punches in Bagley, in Alec Burks, there is going to be a need for a rebound gobbler, a guy that, can get an offensive rebound, put something back in the basket. Like, you're not going to have to run plays for Noel. Like, Burks is going to be able to go out there and do his thing. Isaiah Livers is going to be able to go out there and space the floor. Bagley's going to be able to go out there and pick on whichever big or whichever forward he gets matched up on, whether that's him backing him down, him trying to take one of his mid-range shots. Like, Noel is just going to be out there to defend, communicate, rim protect, and that's encouraging. Like, I am glad that the Pistons made it a priority to go get more rim protection. And I think having a guy like Noel is great for Stewart and Duren, and that was something that he was asked about at Media Day, was the type of role he's going to have in terms of mentoring these young bigs on the roster. And I think that's just, almost just as important as the type of role he's going to play on the floor. So I think having him in the fold is important. I don't think he's going to be DPOY. I don't think he's going to be a candidate for DPOY. I don't think he's going to be in the game enough to be a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. But I do admire and respect the quote, the attitude, the mindset, and hopefully it bleeds out onto the court and helps the Pistons.
Yeah, I mean, look, you don't anticipate him on a roster with three young centers being a guy who's necessarily going to get enough opportunity to be a Defensive Player of the Year, much less the single greatest help defender of all time in Ben Wallace. But you know what? If he does, I'm not going to complain if they have a Defensive Player of the Year candidate coming off of their bench. Two more. Killian Hayes. We haven't talked about him on this podcast. He said that his goal this year is firstly to be that defensive voice, that leader on defense. He also mentioned that he worked on his shot all summer with the coaches. I've seen some people on Twitter not too thrilled with how his shot looks, but in terms of what he's saying he wants to focus on in terms of being that leader on defense this year, especially coming off of the bench. How do you feel about that? Is that something you're buying into? Is that something that you see as a positive? Or do you kind of see it as a negative that he's not even really talking about being a driver of the offense coming off the bench? He's already kind of been like, hey, you know what? I'm going to work on my shot, but I'm the defensive point guard off this bench.
Yeah, I think Killian's comments were certainly eye-raising from media day, and he might have been the first or maybe the second player to speak. So I think a lot of eyes were on him, and there was a little bit just more energy in the room because it was early in the day. I think the quotes are encouraging. He talked about how his first 2 seasons in the league didn't go as planned, and he's aware of that. But he's confident in where he's at. And outside of that, he didn't say a whole lot else. It was a lot of kind of repeating himself and rewording his answers the rest of the way through. I'm glad that he's aware that his first 2 seasons didn't go as planned. I'm sure he feels that way mainly because he got injured. But more importantly, I'm glad to hear him use the word confidence because – and he used it multiple times because that's something I never really got. Those were never vibes that I got from Killian Hayes when he was on the court. I never heard him talk about or never saw him play and feel like, oh yeah, this guy's confident in what he's trying to do out on the court. So seeing that, and I think he does understand, like, look, this isn't my team. This is Cade. They drafted me, and then the next 2 drafts, they spent top 5 picks on 2 guards. Like, I'm not the starter right now. I need to be the best player I can be in my role. And if he truly is believing in that and buying into that, that's significant for Detroit because there is still potential in Killian Hayes. For as much heat as he gets, there is still a player in there. There is still potential in there, and there's still time to get that out of him. So I did see some of the shooting videos. I don't necessarily know if that shot form is going to work. I'll save any further judgment until the start of the year.
3 letters, my friend. MKG. Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. That's what I was getting a lot of with that. I was not a big fan. But yeah, I'm with you on that. I think, we've talked about Killian kind of transitioning to potentially being that Sean Livingston type of guy coming off the bench, being a stud. And I certainly think that is something he can do. This year. I'm happy to see him embrace that role, and we certainly hope he has confidence in it. Aaron, I don't really have anything else. I don't know if you had any last-second quotes you wanted to throw out there, but I think we hit on a lot today.
We did.
Yeah, anything else from you?
No, I'm good. I know we've got I think we have one more podcast until preseason.
I can't wait.
So we'll see what else we have in terms of information on the team. Alec Burks is essentially going to miss all of preseason with an injury, and they're taking it slow with Nerlens Noel and Kevin Knox. So we'll keep you posted on that. But other than that, I think that does it for this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, really just going through the media day for the Detroit Pistons. So that is going to do it from us. Thank you to our sponsor, BetOnline, and Lee for making this edition of the POP podcast possible. From Aaron and Jasper, thanks so much for listening, and we will see you guys next time.